This is Victor Counted. I'm the author of Bonding with God, a book that looks at how the psychology of faith from an attachment theoretical lens. Now, this book, I think it's something a lot of clinicians and faith leaders are adopting for their communities and churches, and some Christian universities have also adopted this book for their classes. And I'm excited to see the impact that this work is having. And today I want to talk about three kinds of persons, and I want you to tell me which of them that you. Person number one prays constantly. They genuinely love God deeply, but they are never quite sure that they are close enough to God. In fact, when God seems distant to them, they immediately wonder what they did wrong. For this kind of people, prayer oftentimes feels like an effort. They need reassurance seeking. They're checking constantly because they are never fully convinced that God is still there for them. Now, person number two believes in God. They are intellectually sincere, but emotional closeness makes them really uncomfortable. They prefer to engage with faith through ideas rather than relationship. They're very logical in their approach with God, in the way they relate with God. Prayer sometimes feels a bit unnecessary for them. They are more comfortable about God than they are comfortable with God. Now, person number three prays with an openness that is not desperate. They can bring their doubts and their questions and their failures to God without panicking about the relationship's survival. They trust in God's character even when they can't even feel His presence. They are honest in prayer because they've sort of learned it's safe to be honest in prayer. Now, which of these three persons or these three examples resonate well with you? I'll give you a second to think about it. Now, in Bonding with God, I identified these as three fundamental patterns of faith attachment: anxious, avoidant, secure. And they sort of map directly onto the attachment styles themselves that psychological research has identified in human relationship. But ultimately, it's important to note that none of this is sort of a permanent verdict on your spiritual life. They are sort of patterns, and like any patterns can change, but you cannot change what you have not named. I used to tell my students that the first step to, freedom or solving any problem is self-awareness. You've got to be aware that you have a problem before someone can help you or before you can think about a solution. It's like having a bad breath, if someone tells you have a bad breath and you've not discovered that for yourself, and you're not aware that you have a bad breath, you probably will be offended. And so let me unpack each one of these patterns briefly. The anxious faith attachment style, I think, often develops when early love was inconsistent. Sometimes it was there, sometimes it wasn't there. You never knew quite where you stood with God. The result, it's a person who sort of clings, who seeks constant reassurance with God, because deep down, they're not convinced that love is reliable. And you find some of those people, trying to really stretch as much as possible, clinging to spiritual leaders that are charismatic. This can also become an opportunity for some, I don't want to use the word charlatans, but some spiritual leaders that might be abusive to, take advantage of such individuals. In their relationship with God, they may pray with intensity. They can fast for a long time. They're seeking, they're not letting go of God, but rarely do they do that with a sense of peace. They can be spiritually exhausted because they are working so hard to maintain a closeness that they cannot simply rest in. Now, if this is you, I think the invitation is not to pray less. It's rather to begin experimenting with rest. It's with the idea, experiment with the idea that God's love is not a reward for your effort. It simply is. God's love is there. It's not because of what you've done or how performative you've been or how spiritual you've been in your work with Him. Now, the avoidant faith attachment style often develops when early relationships often teach us that depending on others leads to disappointment. Now, Growing up, I developed this kind of attachment pattern because when I was growing up, I had a lot of attachment betrayal experiences that really punctured my hope in relationships and people in general. And so for people like that, like myself, self-reliance became our survival strategy. You learn not to need too much. And so in your relationship with God, these kind of believers often function well in religious structures. They know, their theology, they show up consistently, but intimate prayer life or intimate spiritual experience or relationship with God often feels foreign. I remember when I was in the seminary, and I remember a time that I was introduced to speaking in tongues, and initially I was very intellectual about, my understanding of God, and, I believe that God exists and I believe that God is, but at the same time I was very hesitant about engaging deeply, particularly with speaking in tongues. And I had a friend of mine, Ruben, who told me that we could pray for this gift and I would receive it. And initially I didn't believe it because I knew there was a vulnerability that also comes with just allowing yourself being in that space. And so for people like this, vulnerability that, before God feels like something very excessive. And so they pull themselves back, they hold themselves back from really letting go of themselves so that they can be broken and be used by God. Now, if this is you, the invitation is not to manufacture emotions that you don't have. It's rather to take one step towards honesty, to say one true thing to God that you've been too guarded to say for a long time. Now, the secure faith attachment style, I think it's what we are all growing towards. It's sort of a journey, the journey of spiritual transformation. It doesn't mean that you're never doubting. It doesn't mean that you're never struggling. It doesn't mean that you're never feeling God's absence. It means having a foundation stable enough to hold the doubts that you have without being destroyed by them. It means that you can be honest with God because you've experienced enough of His faithfulness to trust that the relationship can still survive with your truth. That the relationship with God can survive the truth that you have. Now, here's the good news that sort of runs through every page of my book, Bonding with God. Security is not reserved for people who had ideal childhood. It is not a personality type that you sort of either have or you don't. It's sort of a developmental outcome. It is what happens when a person's God bond is tested and found faithful. And I think that, every act of honesty in prayer, every moment of showing up when you did not feel like it, every time that you choose to trust God when you couldn't feel anything, these are deposits. These are, it's like picking up your leftover baskets from previous miracles. These are deposits. They are building something on the inside of you. And so this week, I want you to do something simple. Maybe read Psalm 46, the whole thing, read the whole passage. Notice what it says, that God is my refuge, my strength. And then notice what it does not say. It does not say the waters stop. It does not say that the mountains stay in place. It says rather that even while the earth gives away, we will not fear. And I think that's secure faith right there. That's a secure caregiving faith. Not a faith that kind of removes the storm, not a faith that knows who to run to in it. And so ask God to grow that in you, to grow a faith that knows who to run to in it. And I'm not talking about spiritual performance. I'm not talking about you performing this request. It can be an honest request to God to grow something in you, to grow this kind of secure faith in you. And come back next week because we're just getting started with the series. And if you've not picked up the book Bonding with God, I would encourage you to pick it up. It just came out through Baker Academic. And it's a book, again, like I mentioned, that can help us make sense of our spiritual experiences from an attachment theoretical lens. And every chapter of this book is built in such a way it can help you grow in your faith and in your relationship with God. I'm Victor Counted. I look forward to speaking to you next time. Bye for now.